So I pretty frequently say that my best friend is never wrong when it comes to her recommendations for me. I've said this in a number of videos. I know I have because I've got a whole spiel just memorized for it when it comes up. But she's never been wrong when she's told me that I'm gonna love a book. She's never been wrong when she told me I was going to hate a book. And it seemed like the D20 that I rolled at the beginning of the month to determine what I was going to be reading for August had some opinions on that. It seems to have wanted to make me test that theory, because 2 of the books that I got this month, of the 3 that I rolled for, are books that she's read and asked me to read so that we can discuss them. But one of those books she hated and one she loved. So we're gonna put it to the test. I'm gonna read both of them and see if my opinions align with her thoughts on both of these books. So the first one that we rolled, and the one that she hated, is A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foss Meadows. I did just smack myself in the face with the book. This happens a lot. Anyway, she hated this book, and hilariously she picked this up on my recommendation because I read just like the first few pages of the sample on Kindle, and I really liked the writing in it. I thought it was really interesting. It was giving me somehow like a little bit Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice kind of vibes, just in the writing itself. I didn't know anything else about this beyond that, other than I know a few people have said there's a very graphic scene very early in the book and that you should be aware of that going in. So that was like everything I knew about the book at that point. I was telling her about it. I went out and bought it. She went out and bought it and or rented it from the library. I think actually she got it from the library because she is smarter than I am and uses the library more than I do. And she got it, read it immediately, and proceeded to rant to me about it. Not spoiling anything for me, but just kind of ranting about the characters and the world building and the politics and pretty much most aspects of the book. At the time she said she didn't hate it, but the more she thinks about it, the less she likes it. So that happened, and that pretty much killed my interest in reading this, which was a bummer since I just spent hardcover money on it. But I've been meaning to get to it because she's asked me to read it so that we can actually talk about it rather than her just kind of venting at me about the events of the book. So I've been meaning to read this for a while anyway. But interestingly enough, the other book that I rolled for, that was one she had read, is a book that she loved that she gifted to me. This is Sword Dance by A.J. DeMoss. And the reasons that she hates A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, she loves this. Those pieces, the characterizations, the politics, the world building, all of those elements she loves in this book. And she has just raved about this and said it's wonderful, that she thinks I'm gonna love it. And so I've been meaning to get to this one for a while. She gifted this one to me, I think it was last year. Been sitting on this one for a while and I've been meaning to read it. So I just thought it was really funny that these both came up in one month. They're very similar in genre. They're both fantasy romance stories. They're both queer fantasy romance stories, more specifically. And I'm just really interested to see if the pattern holds up between these 2 books. If she continues to be correct, that I'm gonna hate this and I'm gonna love this. So that's what we're gonna be finding out, and I think I'm probably gonna start with A Strange and Stubborn Endurance just because I'd like to be moving in an upward trajectory across the video. Almost said across the story. It's been a long day. Yeah, I'd like to have kind of an upward trajectory into the video on a high note with Sword Dance, since I suspect she's probably going to be correct. But yeah, we're going to be diving into A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, and if nothing else, this will get it off my shelf, and I won't be sitting there staring at it and going, I need to read this, so that I can at least talk about it and know what she's angry about in this book. So we're going to start here, and I'll check back in with you. I think I'm going to aim for maybe like once I get started, kind of how I'm feeling through the beginning, since I know there's something pretty graphic. And then my goal, I think, is just going to be to do like a 50% check-in and then final thoughts. And then we'll do the same for Sword Dance. I think that seems reasonable. So I'm going to go get started, and I'll see you guys momentarily with my initial thoughts. So it took me a lot longer than it probably should have. It's been several days since I started this vlog, but I have finally started A Strange and Stubborn Endurance. And I'm about 120 pages in. I've gotten 1 perspective section from Bellicin and 1 perspective section from Cathari. The book is alternating them every 5 chapters, so I feel like I can kind of give you my initial thoughts now. I'm far enough in that I have a sense of what's going on, what the plot is, what the characters are like, etc. So, unfortunately, I have to just say that so far my friend is correct, because I have a list, I made a list, I should say, of things that I've liked so far and things that I've disliked so far. And unfortunately the dislike list is much longer at this point in time. I'm hoping that parts of this book will get better, but overall there's just some major issues that are not going to be able to be resolved within the course of the book, because I don't think the book even acknowledges them as issues. So far she's correct. I'm gonna try and keep this as spoiler free as I can, but if I end up going into spoiler territory, I'll put like a timestamp on the screen to like skip to. I'll put like a warning on the screen. But we are gonna try and keep this as spoiler free as possible. So we're following in this one Velisyn, who in the very first couple of chapters, I'm just gonna tell you, I feel like it's a spoiler, but at the same time I think it's a spoiler you need to have. In the very first few chapters, he is raped by a former lover, and then through the process of that is also outed as gay to his father, and he lives in a place that is very anti-gay. Just before this happens, though, he finds out he's supposed to be marrying a woman from a neighboring country. So he's from R'alia, he's supposed to be marrying a woman from Tithina. However, obviously he gets outed as being gay, and the envoy arrives to like finish the arrangements for this, and it's like, oh well, that's no problem. Being gay is totally normal in Tithina, and there's a gay son in the family you're supposed to be marrying into, so it's totally fine. You'll just marry him instead. So he is suddenly being sent off to this other place to marry someone he's never met. And he's also dealing with the trauma of the rape that occurs in the first 2 chapters. So this book, right from the outset, has a very strange tone. It's really dark for a book that I know is going to be a romance, and I would say that it doesn't really let up for Velisyn at all. He never catches a break, at least in the first 120 pages. He is just suffering and having like bad thing after bad thing after bad thing happen to him, which is kind of one of the major issues that I have with this book, and I'll kind of come back to that in a minute. But I do want to start with the things that I did like, because there are a handful of things that I think work well. First of all, just the sentence level and paragraph level writing is really good. I'm really enjoying like the actual experience of reading it. The descriptions are really lush and interesting, and I also, kind of on a separate note, love the dialogue. So it's got this kind of Jane Austen-y feel to it, I think, both in the descriptions and the dialogue, but also like a little bit of a fanfic-y feel. It's kind of a weird combination, but it has this like what if Jane Austen but fanfiction kind of a vibe to it. But the dialogue in here is really funny. There's a lot of like snarky one-liners, and there's lots of these moments where characters will start playing off of each other, and I really am enjoying those like little moments between the characters and the way that they interact with each other. I also really like a couple of the side characters. For one, we have Markle, who is Velisyn's servant, but they're also like very close friends. They've known each other for many years, and Markle is mute and he speaks in sign. And he and Velisyn have this kind of like private language because they both sign to each other. And Markle is just like this really supportive, kind person, but he's also kind of just funny. He's really snarky. I think a lot of the characters are quite snarky, but Markle has this very like witty dialogue that he engages in with Velisyn pretty frequently. They're like, clearly they're very close friends, and there's this space for them to kind of drag each other just a little bit, but like benevolently. So that happens, and he's also just like very competent. He's very good at what he does, and I really appreciate like a really competent character. So I really like Markle. I also really like Lady Sign, who is supposed to be Velisyn's stepmother. Unfortunately, I don't think she comes up very much. She shows up in the very beginning of the book, and I really like her, but I don't think she shows up ever again. So she's just kind of like in this beginning section, but I do like the like rapport that she builds with Velisyn in the first couple of chapters, because she is able to like relate to him on some pretty difficult topics, and I thought that that like bit of relationship, and in the way that it kind of like tells us something about her but also tells us something about Velisyn and his like views on the world was interesting. So I think those are mostly the highlights. Then we have to get into the things I didn't like as much, and I think the biggest one, the thing that kind of influences everything else, is that this book is very black and white. You don't have people who are good but do bad things, or people who are bad but do good things. You just have good people and evil people. You also have good country, which is Tithina, and evil country, which is R'alia. And basically R'alia is supposed to be like extremely conservative. It's homophobic, it's transphobic, it's misogynistic, it's classist. It has all of these like horrible qualities about it. And Tithina is given as the, like, antithesis of Ralia. So it's supposed to be, like, very egalitarian, it's very, like, open. There's, you know, there isn't homophobia, transphobia, misogynist thought, classism. However, there is. So this is a thing I will come back to, but I think that we are given these two countries that are supposed to be like evil country and good country. But good country is actually, pardon my language, quite fucked up, and the book doesn't seem to realize that that is the case, or at the very least it seems to justify some of what Tithina does based on, like, well, at least it's not Ralia. So I think there's some major issues with that. In particular, there are, you know, we're told that this country is really good and the culture is really open and accepting, and there's just not this kind of, like, oppression of people based on things outside of their control, except that we meet a group of people, like the very first people that we meet from Tithina proceed to make some pretty upsetting and disgusting ableist remarks about Markle. While they're traveling with them, they remark that Markle is too simple to experience sexual desire, which is a weird thing to say about a guy you've never spoken to. Obviously, he's mute, he mostly talks in sign, or he writes. He also has, like, a slate that he carries with him. So mostly they're, like, learning about him through Velisson, who was, like, translating for him. But it's a weird thing to say about somebody that you hardly know. And then there's also this pretty significant class hierarchy in Tithina, where, like, people who are amongst the nobility are not supposed to have lovers or close friends or whatever in the, like, lower classes. So there's, like, a whole kind of derogatory term that they've come up with that's for people who, like, employ their lower class lovers in their household so that they can have access to them. And it's just, like, that's there, and the book never really questions that, and never really says, hey, this is kind of messed up, actually, isn't it? Like, Tithina acts all great and all high and mighty, but maybe there's some darkness here too. It never really acknowledges that at all. It doesn't ever discuss it. It just kind of is like, oh, but at least it's not Ralia. I think another important thing about Tithina that I am not enjoying is that it has this weird, like, imperialistic vibe to it. Like, it isn't a country that has gone and colonized other places or invaded other places, as far as we know, but they keep talking about Ralians as being, like, uncivilized. There's one character who talks about wanting to civilize Velisson. They're also constantly being like, oh, that uncivilized, backwards religion of theirs. And it's just this, like, really uncomfortable feeling of, like, cultural superiority. Like, they keep going on and on and on about how fantastic Tithina is and how terrible Ralia is. And there's nothing that kind of counteracts that in the book. We never get anything, at least in the first 120 pages, again, I'm only 120 pages in, but we never get anything where, like, Velisson pushes back on any of those views. Velisson obviously has, like, a difficult relationship to his home culture because he is gay, and again, Ralia is very homophobic, and so he's always felt kind of out of place there and has often had to live in secrecy, or, like, keep his kind of social life secret because of the threat of being outed and, like, losing his inheritance. Also, he's, like, exiled because he's gay, like, in the first 2 chapters. So, like, clearly his fears about that were founded, but we never get any pushback from him. So it's like Tithina not only says these horrible things about, like, all of Ralia, like, as if every single citizen of Ralia is a horrible, backwards, uncivilized barbarian. There's never anything in the book that counteracts that viewpoint, that says, hey, wait, maybe we shouldn't paint an entire country with such a broad brush. And I'm finding that really uncomfortable and really unsettling, given that this is supposed to be a romance, and also it's pretty clear that like, that's not the point of the book. It's not supposed to be that, like, maybe Tithina isn't as good as it seems, or isn't as, like, good as it thinks it is. That's clearly not the point of the book so far. I also am very frustrated there's some characters who are incredibly stupid and really awful to Velisson throughout most of the book. Again, I'm coming back to this point about him not being able to catch a break. He has these horrible things happen to him. He's obviously very traumatized. He starts to flinch away from physical touch in a way that he never has before. He's acting kind of paranoid and frightened, and when people mention the name of the man who assaulted him, he, like, freaks out and is trying to, like, run away. And for some reason, nobody clocks this as unusual or concerning in any way. The people from Tithina that he's traveling with at various points are just like, oh, what an ungrateful, spoiled brat. He doesn't want to go marry this very awesome guy he's gonna go marry because he's just like a spoiled brat. And he wants what he doesn't get to have, which is his former lover and or his servant. There's like various gossiping and theories going around. And none of them clock that he's acting like someone who isn't heartbroken, but somebody who is like actively terrified of what's to come. None of them notice. And it's just so frustrating because his behavior is like extremely dramatic and is very like blatantly off. So it's very frustrating to watch them not get it, which like I get that that happens in reality too, that there's probably some element of like not wanting to see that something is wrong, but that doesn't seem to be what's going on here. It's just that they're just genuinely missing the fact that he's behaving very strangely. The last thing that I want to mention that I really didn't like is something, it is a little spoilery. I'll put a spoiler tag here. It's not like a big spoiler because it's 2 instances of the same thing. One of them happens in chapter 3 at the very start, so like within the first 20 pages of the book. So spoiler here, I'll put a timestamp in case you want to skip this section. Also, content warning for the section about self-harm. I probably should have put a content warning for sexual assault earlier, but there is a lot of both in this book. Also, if you hear me laughing, it's because I'm laughing due to discomfort that like the ways that this book is handling this is not done well. So that's what that is. But there is a suicide attempt in chapter 3 and another one a little while later. So within the first 120 pages there are 2 suicide attempts. My understanding is that that is the total sum of that. But both of them feel really voyeuristic in a way that's really uncomfortable, because the first one seems mostly just a setup for him to have like this dramatic moment with Markle, and it doesn't feel like it fits with the character we've been given so far or the events that have happened to him so far. He you know, he is assaulted and pretty much immediately after it begins to spiral. So I'm like, this one, at least the reasoning behind it, I can kind of understand why he kind of leaps to this conclusion that like his life is over anyway, he may as well end it himself. I understand how he gets there, but the way it's written, it's very like descriptive and we're very in his head, and it then just sets up this like moment with Markle. And then it's like, oh, well, he's fine now. And then we get another instance of it shortly after he meets Kethari, like the next evening that they're together, or the same day that they meet, he tries to kill himself in Kethari's rooms, and Kethari has to talk him down. And the thing that I found so unnerving about this, in a way that wasn't like having the emotional impact it was supposed to have, but like I think this was done really poorly, is that it's like he's setting up a tableau of suffering and waiting to have a witness for it. My friend and I were talking about this, and I've been having trouble describing it, but I think the way that she put it was really clear, which it feels eroticized. Not sexualized, but like eroticized. The whole visual setup of it and the way that things unfold feels like it's a display. Like Velison's suffering is a display for Kethari and the reader. And I think she likened it to something that was really helpful in kind of understanding the way that she was describing it, which is that if you've ever seen pictures of Saint Sebastian, I'll link the article that she reminded me of about this in the description below if I remember to. But if you've seen like paintings of Saint Sebastian, there's I can't remember what he's the saint of, but like he was killed via being shot with arrows, and there's these various paintings of him that are very like eroticized. His body is like on display. Sometimes he's not even like got arrows in him, he's holding them, or like he's completely nude whilst being shot with arrows. And there's just lots of like these kind of erotic-esque images of Saint Sebastian being shot, and that's what it feels like, is that it's supposed to be like a visual display for Kethari and for the reader, and not so much like an actual emotional reaction from Velison. And it just feels very uncomfortable, and it doesn't make sense with the progression of the story up to that point. It's like, why is he doing this? And it was just very uncomfortable. I really did not like that part of it. I do like that Kethari is the one person who's being nice to him, and their like relationship seems to be developing. By the way, this is we're out of spoiler territory, so I will take that warning off the screen. But Kithari's like the one person kind of being nice to him. So like I'm enjoying their actual interactions between the two of them. I like them individually, and the ways that they interact with each other as characters. But I just think it's doing some really uncomfortable things with the way that it's dealing with Velison's mental health. And as my friend pointed out today, because we were talking about this some more, lots of traumatic things happen to Velison in like very short time frame. He is experiencing lots of suffering. But the only thing that the book really seems to care about him like dealing with, and the only thing that he seems to have been traumatized by, is the rape itself, and like that's kind of a recurring issue. Even though all of these other horrible things have happened, those don't seem to like impact what's happening in the story at all. So it's kind of like, why do we keep having to watch him suffer if it doesn't mean anything? So yeah, I just think this is doing a really poor job of doing the like healing journey that it's trying to do. It actually says in the content note at the beginning that the story is supposed to be one about healing and like recovery. And I just don't think it's doing that very well, because it feels like it's constantly putting Velison in the role of like the pretty victim. He doesn't ever get to be complicated or messy. He just gets to be pretty and suffer. And it's just very strange, and I think really poorly done. And this has ended up being a really long update, given that I'm only 120 pages into it. Beyond everything else, there's very little plot so far. He's moved to Tithena, and there's been an attempted murder twice, I think. So there's like some sort of mystery of like who's trying to kill people in Tithena, who's trying and failing to kill people in Tithena, and that's pretty much all that has happened. So like overall there's been very, very little plot, and a lot of these scenes feel like they drag on for quite a while. So it's a very weirdly paced and weirdly written book, and I think the thing I'm finding the most frustrating so far is just that there's so much here that I could see being really, really good. I think there's really solid like bones to the story, but it's just not been written very well at all. It's many hours later, by which I mean it was about 5:30 or so when I last updated, and I've now made it to 3:22 and it's 11:30. So it's been about 6 hours, including a break for dinner and everything, and I've been chatting back and forth with my friend who has already read this book, and we've been kind of discussing it as I go along. But I have made it to 3:22, which is where I had intended to stop today. I had to read a little bit of extra today to make up for not reading as much yesterday, but my feelings are still mixed. I think I'm feeling a little more positively towards this kind of middle section. We're getting a lot more of the mystery, and I am curious to find out where the mystery is going to go. I think there's some interesting pieces being laid out, and I am liking Kithari and Velison's relationship and the development of it. I would argue that it's a little bit too frictionless. Like, it's very sweet, they're very cute together, they work really well together, but given that they're from very different cultures and like circumstances of their meeting and getting married are difficult at best, they don't really have any kind of conflict or friction with each other at the beginning. There's just this like sense of like immediate camaraderie. They immediately work together really well, they get along, they know exactly what the other person needs to hear, and it's just like there's no adjustment at all required from either of them, except for when it's dramatic for the book to say like, oh, well, it's difficult for Velison to acclimatize to Titheni, like cultural customs around like same-sex relationships. That's about the only time anything kind of not even really conflict like arises, but where they have to like have a discussion about how things are difficult for Velison. There isn't really any point where they disagree, or where Kithari says the wrong thing, or Velison is like angry, and I think that I would like this book more if Velison got to be more complicated and have more complex feelings about the things that were happening. There's like one moment in here where something really awful happens, which this is also just like a recurring thing. Awful things are constantly happening to Velison, but yet another awful thing happens to him, and he finally does kind of have hit like a breaking point. He kind of snaps, and he's freaking out. He's like having a panic attack, and Kithari starts to go to tell him to like calm down his breathing, or like calm his breathing, because he's like hyperventilating. But before he can like finish saying anything, Velison tells him like, if you tell me to calm down, I will bite you, and he like snarls that, and he's very unreasonable for like about half a page to a page, and that's basically the only time we get to see Velisyn, at least up to this point, which is past the halfway point, have like a complicated feeling about things, or to like lash out at other people, be kind of messy and angry and complex. And I really just want more of that. I think that like the mystery is interesting, but because the like relationship between Velisyn and Kethari is so frictionless and smooth, like it just works, the tone of the romance and the tone of the mystery are really at odds. Also like the timeline, because the mystery is progressing over like a couple of days, and that I could believe, like a really quick punchy mystery. But the things that Velisyn has experienced should take him much longer than a couple of days to recover from, and yet it's like one guy shows him some kindness and all of a sudden he's like feeling better about everything, which I don't think those two things work together. And I think that this book would be much better if it had lower stakes and no murder mystery, and it was just like a longer term look at the development of Kethari and Velisyn's relationship. Or if it did have both of these elements, but the romance was more difficult, it had more obstacles and conflicts in it, and if Velisyn just got to be messier and angrier and have more complex feelings about everything, and like express those feelings in ways that aren't just like reasonable and pretty, because he really is just like too sensible, I think, for the things that are happening to him. He just has these like horrible things happening one after another, and he just never really lashes out about that. He's just like, well, this is what's happening and I'm gonna be reasonable about it. And it's just like these things are compounding, but the book doesn't really care that they're compounding, and I just feel like it either needs to be less high stakes and just focused on the relationship, or it needs to have more messiness in that relationship. So I am liking it a little bit better than I was, but I'm still like struggling with it. There is one thing that happens partway through here that I think is really upsetting, and this is a thing I knew was coming that my friend told me about, and I'm going to talk spoilers again just very briefly here, because it's something that I think is something the author clearly didn't think through the implications of it, because it's presented as being a positive thing here. This is in terms of the justice system in Tithena, and it's presented as being this like positive thing here, but it so obviously has space to be abused, and it's such a like clear injustice that I think it's weird that it's presented as being this like positive thing. So I'll briefly talk about this, but I'll just, you know, dip into spoilers briefly. But basically, Velisyn's attacker shows back up, Kilik shows back up, and we find out from Kethari that because Velisyn was technically like a part of Clan Edoria because of the like existing marriage contract, the moment that the envoy arrived in the little village that the beginning of the book takes place in, and witnessed the interaction between Kilik and Velisyn, Velisyn was under Adarian protection, and so he can technically like bring charges under the Tithonai legal system against Kilik. But the Tithonai justice system has a feature where the nobility, and particularly people like his family is the ruling family of the city of Kikatai, the nobility can use what's called Tieran's privilege, which means that they do not have to take their legal quarrels to the judiciary. They don't have to go to anybody and actually like bring charges against them. They can deal with punishments, as Kethari puts it, in-house, where somebody would be tried by the Tieran himself, and then the Tieran could like mete out whatever punishment he wanted, and it's typically expected that they will report the findings of those hearings and like whatever punishment was meted out to the judiciary, but they're not required to do that. So they can just hurt people, they can like revenge themselves against people with impunity. And this is exactly what they do. They find out that Kilik is here, and they trick Kilik into confessing in front of Kethari, and admitting that he had raped Velicen, and then Caethari apprehends him, and they decide to brand him as a rapist, which is actually a Rallian punishment, but they're using the Tithonai system to do it. And it's not even like a way that the system isn't meant to be used. And so they brand him, he's allowed to, like, 1 day to recover, and then he's supposed to be, like, set off on his way. They do allow him to have medical aid for both before the branding and after it, but that's about the only level of official involvement that happens there, is that a doctor is present. And the only repercussions for them is that the Tierran later is like, hey, so I heard that you've got a Rallian nobleman locked up in my house and you didn't tell me. And Caethari's like, yeah, that's true, we do. And then he doesn't say anything else, and the Tierran goes, oh, well, I'm sure you had your good reasons for it, so anyway, it's fine. And, like, moves on with his life. And I just think that's incredibly messed up, because, like, in this particular circumstance, we know that Killik is guilty, and we also know that, like, Velicen really doesn't want there to be, like, a public record of what happened to him, because he's really, like, ashamed of his own, like, what he sees as his own failure to fight back, even though Caethari makes it clear that he disagrees with that view of it. And it's clear the reader is supposed to also disagree with that view of it, but Velicen is very uncomfortable with the idea that people might know what had happened to him. And so this, like, kind of routing around the system allows them to prevent that from getting out. So, like, here in this one instance, we know that the person who is being punished is guilty, and it allows Velicen to avoid this kind of, like, public shame that he's afraid of. But there are so many ways that that could be abused, that, like, the nobility can just get away with whatever they want, and also they can just punish whoever they want without any kind of check on that power. And the book doesn't even begin to touch on that or question it. I really don't think the author even thought through the way the system works beyond just this, like, one specific circumstance. And I think it is, pardon my language, quite fucked up, and I'm really disappointed to see it presented as, like, a positive thing. So I think that's my one other, like, big thing that I really haven't liked. But generally, feelings still pretty mixed. We're done with spoilers now, so, you know, if you want to read this for yourself, you no longer have to worry about hearing something about the plot from me. But I may do spoilers again if something incredibly messed up happens in the later part of the book. But I have basically this much left, and I'm hoping to read the bulk of that tomorrow. I'll finish it tomorrow if I can manage it, but I'll just have to see what tomorrow evening brings. I've got a lot of writing to do tomorrow for work, so I'm not really sure what that's going to look like in terms of my evening and my, like, mental energy to read a lot. But I did read a pretty significant chunk today. I'm glad to be caught up. And yeah, I'm just, like, overall feeling very mixed, feeling a little disappointed, especially because there's so much potential here. There's so many things I do like about the book. I really like the relationship between Caethari and Velicen. There's also some really nice friendships along the side of the story, because there's Velicen's relationship with Markle. There's a couple of friendships that Caethari has with an ex of his, and also his, like, commanding officer in the military. They've been very close for many years. So there's these, like, really sweet friendships that are developing, but overall I think the plot and the way that a lot of the world building has been written and some of the character development is just really disappointing. So anyway, I'm getting there. I'm hopefully going to finish it within the next day-ish, and then I'll be moving on to Sword Dance. But so far I'm glad that I'm finally reading it, but I don't know that this is going to be a book that I will find memorable or, like, ever come back to. I've done it. I finished A Strange and Severed Endurance, and a day earlier than I had originally planned. I actually intended to finish this tomorrow and then start Sword Dance immediately afterwards, but I have in fact finished it this evening, and it's not nearly as late tonight as it was yesterday. So I started about 5 o'clock, took a break for dinner, and now it's about 10:30, and I've read the last 200-ish pages today. So I've done it. I'm free, and I have to say that I'm ending the experience with much the same mixed feelings as I had before. Let me close the door real quick. I don't know if it's going to come across over audio. My mom's watching something in the other room, and I'm realizing that I can hear it, so I'll be right back. There we go. Door is shut. I don't know if that was coming through in the audio, but it was distracting me as I was trying to, like, think and talk. So yeah, mixed feelings. I think that this book has some solid pieces. I really like the banter. I like like some of the relationships that develop. There's some really good friendships in here, but ultimately I think that it's messy and not like in a compelling way. Mostly I feel like it's too easy and it's far too long. So the investigation goes along for quite a long time because it's over 500 pages, but it starts to feel quite repetitive partway through because it's just like a horrible thing happens. Vel and Kay do a little bit of investigating. Then they have some sort of like little conversation about their investigation and what to do next. Then something horrible happens. Then they do a little investigating. Then they have a little conversation about what to do next. And it's just kind of like that on and on. We finally do get a couple of like downtime sort of scenes right near the end where there's like stuff that's not investigation related happening. And both of those are then like punctuated by awful things happening. So it's just kind of like it never relents on that. And we really don't get a lot of them just like interacting together as people, not as like amateur detectives. So I was a little frustrated with that repetitiveness. I also just think it's like way too smooth in both the investigation and in kind of the relationship development. There's just never enough conflict. There's never a point where, sorry, I got cat hair on my tongue. There's never a point where Vel and Kay are wrong about their assumptions or about like the conclusions they're drawing. They're always right. It always leads them in the correct direction, and they never really meet much in the way of resistance along this like investigative journey. At the same time, in their relationship development, I think I said this in the previous update, it's just like too frictionless. There's just never any moment where like someone says the wrong thing, someone puts their foot in their mouth and has to deal with that. There's never a point where they like miscommunicate, which normally I hate miscommunication, but I think there needed to be at least a little bit of it given that they were from such different cultures and backgrounds and had such different expectations going into the wedding and the marriage. So it really just needed like some kind of like miscommunication or misunderstanding at least. It just felt like they were so perfect for each other that nothing ever went wrong for them. Every plan that they hatched worked. And it just was like, I wanted them to have some sort of resistance. I wanted something to go wrong. And it kind of does at the very end, but in kind of an unhinged way that I didn't feel like worked. I also thought that the mystery answer was super obvious because there was literally one character with a motive. And I guessed very early on that it was going to be that character. And it was, of course, that character. So, obvious person is obvious. And the reveal of that, I think, is also frustrating because they spend 500 pages investigating, not even 500, like 400 of these pages, investigating and trying to figure out who's behind this like big conspiracy against them. And it's solved when they like accidentally stumble into the villain monologuing at somebody else. And they just like, they don't find the villain by way of their investigation, or I guess they do, like they're out actively investigating, they're going to the place that they're going to because they think there might be a clue there, but like they don't have a realization of, oh, it's this person, and then like have to go find them and try to figure out how to like outsmart them. They just stumble into it and they're like, oh crap, we have to deal with this now. And I was really frustrated at that. Like, what was the point of all that investigation if they were simply going to stumble into the answer at the end? So, also, this book has a terrible habit of, like, when someone is revealed to be evil, they go from being pretty normal to, like, absolutely unhinged and evil. Like, they were perfectly normal up until the point that they're revealed to be the bad guy or a bad guy. And then they're just, like, comedically evil. And I have to say that the motive for this character is not very convincing. We see very little of their, like, motive on page, other than we get told about it from other characters. They don't do a whole lot at all throughout the book. And then they give this, like, explanation that just proves that they're an idiot, that the reasons that they're doing this stuff is completely nonsensical, and it's just not a very good resolution. So, yeah, overall, highly disappointing. I'm gonna give it 2.5 stars, because I don't think it's irredeemable, and there are some things that I do very much like, but I think that it's really poorly executed, and it's a shame because there are some really good moments in here and some really strong potential in some of the scenes and some of the, like, bones of the story. I do have to point out, though, this was a funny thing I discovered right at the very end, that apparently my copy is not bound properly. because I was reading like the last kind of climactic few scenes, and an entire section just like popped right out. I noticed it seemed like the binding was a little loose at one point, and in fact it was, because a whole section just like popped straight out of the book. So, at the same moment that the plot was falling apart, so too was the book itself. And I found that a little bit ironic and funny. But I have successfully finished it, and now I can move on to Sword Dance, which I'm actually very excited to read. As I've been reading A Strange and Separate Endurance over the last few days, I've been talking to my friend who has read it before me, and we, through our conversation, picked up on a few like specific things that I was finding frustrating, and we're kind of discussing those. And she's just told me that she thinks that the things that I didn't like in A Strange and Separate Endurance are done much better in Sword Dance, and the things that I do like in A Strange and Separate Endurance are also done much better in Sword Dance. So I'm very excited to read it. I did do a little bit of a taste test earlier and read like the first page, and I immediately like the main character. I think he's going to be fun to follow. The very first page is him doing something kind of out of spite, and I really found that amusing, and I'm excited to read it. So I'm looking forward to moving on to that tomorrow. I think I am going to leave it for tomorrow though, because it's 10:30. I've been going to bed fairly late last couple nights. I should probably get some sleep because I have a big project I'm working on at work. And yeah, I'll leave that for tomorrow. I don't know if my brain can handle more words tonight. I got started on Sword Dance. I'm about 20% in, so I feel like I can go ahead and give you my initial thoughts on it. It's just a day later. I figured I'd dive right into the next book. But I'm finding it hard to describe this book because plot-wise not much has happened, but I am having a better time with it than I had with A Strange and Separate Endurance, at least so far. So this one is an ancient Greece inspired book, and it's following Demiscos, who's an ex-soldier. He's like in his 30s, and he's had some sort of injury that has left him with a permanent limp. So now he's working in this sort of administrative role in the army, and has been sent to a friend's estate to negotiate a contract with her for fish sauce, because she has a fish sauce factory on her estate. So he goes to negotiate this contract, and his boss is also like, make a vacation of it. Like, you're tired, you need some time off. So he goes and he's like visiting this friend, and when he arrives he discovers he's not the only guest. There's actually quite a few other people on the estate at the time, and they're all clearly up to something. They all clearly have secret agendas, and that's very much not Demiscos' thing. Like, he is not a politics person, so he's just trying to like stumble through whatever the situation is long enough to get this contract figured out, have a bit of a break, and then head home. So he's very uncomfortable in the situation he finds himself in, and he really doesn't enjoy the company of any of the other people here besides his friend Neone. But he also meets a character named Vrozda, so that is the love interest, and Vrozda is a eunuch and a sword dancer, and is also clearly much better at politics. That's about all I can say about what's happened, because honestly it's just been kind of establishing some of the politics of the world and some of the characters and their different personalities, and some of the like strangeness of the way that they're acting, and there's not been like a lot of plot yet, but it's very clear that the politics are going to matter a lot to the story. I think overall it's feeling a lot more well developed than A Strange and Separate Endurance. Like, we again have a bilingual main character, and in this instance it makes sense that he knows the other language, because Demiscos was stationed in this other country called Zash, and he knows the Zashian language. So when he meets Vrozda, who is Zashian, he's able to speak with him both in his Femian language, which he's from a place called Feme. I don't think that's what the name of the language is, but I've now forgotten it. But he's from Feme, he's able to speak the language of Feme, but he also happens to know Zashian and is able to speak with Vrozda in both languages, and Vrozda knows both because he's lived in both places as well. So like, it makes sense that they're bilingual. There's like a good reason for them to both be bilingual, and I didn't feel like that was well established in Strange and Separate Endurance. It didn't really make sense that they didn't have like a language barrier. So I feel like that's better here. I also feel like the politics matter more, because we're getting this set up where there's some characters here who have very strong opinions about the relationship between Feme and Zash, and there's kind of a like white supremacist analog in this story. There's some people here who have some very strong opinions about what they call Femian purity, and it involves a lot of like kind of similar ideas about like getting rid of foreigners out of their country and stuff like that. So there's like clearly this undercurrent of tension between Afim and Zash, and the different like people who have had like very different roles. Demiscos being like in the military and having experienced the cultures of both places, having one very strong opinion, and the other characters who are mostly philosophers and have not been to Zash having a very different opinion from him. So I'm interested in how the book is exploring that tension, and I think that it's going to be very central to what happens, although nothing has so far happened other than some people have acted very suspicious, and Demiscos, who is like, I'm not good at politics and this is not my thing, but they're really suspicious. Like, he's picking up on it and he's just not sure what to do about it. So that's pretty much all that's happened so far, but I am enjoying it a lot more than A Strange and Stubborn Endurance so far. I really like Demiscos. He's very just like straightforward and direct, and you know, cares about people clearly, and has like a much more broad view of the world because of his time as a soldier, and feels strongly about like the way that people should be treated. So I'm enjoying following him, and his interactions with Virazda so far have been really interesting because clearly they're having a conversation, but they're taking very different things away from those conversations, and have different like reactions to them. And I'm curious to see how that's going to develop over the course of the book, and like what's going to be revealed once we start to find out like what is Virazda's reason for being here and why is he being so secretive, and then like kind of what is everybody else's reason for being here and why are they being secretive. So I feel like there's a lot of stuff yet to come, but I'm really excited to see how it's all going to unfold because I just feel like it's more well developed so far. I'm feeling like the things that are being put on the page actually matter in a way that a lot of what was in A Strange and Stubborn Endurance just didn't matter, and I appreciate that kind of careful world building the book is setting up. So I'm excited to see where things are going to go. I think I'm going to read a little bit more tonight, but I'm not sure how far I'll actually get. But I'll probably try and check in again at the 50% mark. I'll be curious to see like what's actually happening in the plot when I reach that point, since I'm currently 25%, or not 25%, I'm 21% in. So I'm nearing that like 1/4 point, and I just have genuinely no idea what's going to happen. There was no 50% check-in because I devoured the rest of Sword Dance. I freaking loved this. I think like execution, technique, etc. wise, it's probably like a 4.5, but it's gotta be a 5-star for me just for sheer enjoyment. This was so fun. I was like giggling, kicking my feet, like had to keep putting the book down to just appreciate how great the characters were here. I was just having a great time with it. So I completely devoured the last what was that last time, like 21%? That's like 79%. I just tore through it. I read to like the 50% mark yesterday, I think. A little past the 50% mark before I went to bed yesterday. Started it yesterday and now I finished it today. This just was a delight to read. It was so quick and fast-paced as well. And I think that's one of the things that really stands out for me in comparison between this and A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, is that A Strange and Stubborn Endurance is like 500+ pages for no reason, and this moves at a much quicker pace, and yet it has so many things that happen. There's plenty of downtime for the characters to get to know each other. It just is so much better structured and plotted, and it worked out so much better, I think. So I think the last time I checked in, I hadn't yet quite gotten to the plot, and now I can confidently say there isn't really quite a murder mystery the way I was thinking in this one. There is a person who goes missing, because I think I said it was a murder mystery. There's a person who goes missing, and the question is kind of what happened to him, but you kind of know from the start what's likely happened to him, and you also kind of generally have a sense of who's probably responsible for it. So it's more a question of like, what are we going to do about this situation? How do we prove that they've done this thing to him? How do we like determine what their motive was for doing that? How do we also get out of the situation safely? So it's much more about that. It's a lot more about like the politics of the world and this kind of plot that's been unraveling that Demiscos didn't know about until he arrived in this like country estate. He's just kind of plopped in the middle of it, and now he has to figure out how to like navigate all of that. The romance here was wonderful. He and Virazda, I think their romance progresses at about the same like, or over the amount of time that the romance happens in A Strange and Stubborn Endurance. It's about a week in both books. But I think here I'm much more convinced of that romance. They spend a lot more time together, like having kind of normal human conversations, learning about each other, getting used to each other as people, and they both also like mess up. They both say the wrong thing, they upset each other, they get angry at each other, they like have to communicate and like work things out, and they're both really good at that. Like Demiscos is very straightforward and direct, and he tends to put his foot in his mouth a lot because he's like saying things and he's trying to be very direct, but he's not quite sure how to phrase things, and then he says something that like offends somebody, or he picks like the wrong moment to say something. But he's very mature about it and will like then work on explaining why he said what he said. He goes out of his way to like be kind to people and apologize when he's offended them. He makes a point of like addressing things directly with Verazda and not making like assumptions, and Verazda pretty much does the same for him. Verazda is also like incredibly what's the word I want? Not conscientious, but like considerate. He's incredibly considerate because Demiscos, I think I mentioned this in my earlier bit, but if I didn't, he has a disability. He has a permanent limp from something that happened to him while he was in the army, and Verazda is so like considerate and kind towards him about that. Like he immediately goes out of his way to ensure that Demiscos isn't having to like overexert himself when they're investigating, and he's, you know, doing things to help Demiscos but without like condescending to him. And it's just, I really like the dynamic between them. They're both like so respectful of each other, and they clearly like have some sense of what the kind of horrors that they've each been through. They both are clearly like very traumatized from things in their past, but it's not like recent trauma. It's things that have happened many years ago, and they both are just kind of like living with the after effects of those things. They both have reached a point where they're kind of, they've adjusted, they're mostly fairly comfortable and happy with their lives, but like they still have these things that sometimes, you know, emerge when a specific sight or smell or sound triggers it. And so they both kind of have this understanding of course it's like, oh, you're at the beginning. Let me try to get back to the cover. They both have this like understanding of what that's like, and they're just so kind to each other throughout the story. Even when they get mad at each other, it's not like one of them is constantly like belittling the other, or like one of them is only there as an emotional support for the other. They both feel complex, they both feel interesting, and they both get to have some sort of like development and like nuance over the course of the story. So I just really enjoyed this. I think it's fun. I can't tell you a lot about the plot without spoiling it, because I think it's a fairly straightforward plot, but that's kind of the point. It's not really about a mystery. It's about like the situation as it's unfolding and like the different twists and turns that take because of the actions of different people. I just really enjoyed this. I also love that, I think I didn't mention about Strange and Stubborn Endurance that I did want to mention now, is that Strange and Stubborn Endurance, despite being like set in a very like queer normative place, is very male dominated in terms of its cast. All of our main characters are men, and there's a handful of women who are side characters, and they show up occasionally, but they're not really that important on page. This was very different because we do have our two main characters, Demiscos and Verazda, but Verazda's non-binary, mostly uses he, him pronouns, but he is non-binary. And then there's also several significant women characters. In fact, a pretty large portion of the last half of the book, Demiscos and Verazda are working with like a whole team of women. And in particular, we get Demiscos' friend Naoni, who is the one who owns the fish sauce factory, and her house steward Aradni, who is like very competent and kind of terrifying, and I love her. So like we get these really interesting women characters as well, and I felt like that was something that was really missing in A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, is that we had some female characters, but they were all kind of like pushed off to the side. They weren't really like central to the story in a way that like Naoni and Aradni are in this one. So I feel like this was just like much better balanced, and overall just a more enjoyable reading experience. So yeah, I love this one, and I think the answer to my original question, is my best friend always right, is obviously yes. Gave 2.5 stars to one book. I'm gonna give this one 5 stars just for like the sheer enjoyment of it. I loved everything about it. That means I think I need to go like look at the list of recommendations she's given me and just like power through those, because clearly if she said I'm going to like it, she's probably right. So yeah, this was, I think, a successful experiment, and I'm really glad that I've gotten to both of these now. And it was just really funny that the dice worked out this way. I realized I'm back on this page. I went to the cover and it's gone back again. Still holding it up as if that's, you know, helpful in any way. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, although there is a bit of a change coming to that soon. I'll be talking about that, I think, in my September TBR. But for now, posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.